Welcome to Veil Marks, where stories are more than just words. They are windows into the unseen, the untold, and the unforgettable. Today's story will challenge what you believe about loyalty, miracles, and the silent guardians who walk among us. This is not just a tale about a pit bull named Diesel. It is a lesson about courage, sacrifice, and the quiet bonds that can change the course of a life. As Helen Keller once said, "Alone, we can do so little. Together, we can do so much." Stay with us until the end to discover a conclusion that may just shift how you see the world. And remember, your comment and subscription mean more than support. They are the fuel that keeps Veil Marks creating deeper, more meaningful stories for you. The rain fell in relentless sheets, drumming against the glass windows of Ridgeway Hospital. Night had settled heavily over the city, cloaking it in a damp, cold quiet. Inside the hospital, the halls were hushed, save for the occasional soft beeping of monitors and the muffled footsteps of the overnight staff. The night shift had become a ritual of silent endurance, where each hour passed slowly and heavily, weighed down by the quiet struggles unfolding behind closed doors. Outside, beneath the gray glow of a flickering street lamp, a figure emerged from the shadows. Diesel, an aging pit bull with a coat the color of storm clouds and eyes deep with an unreadable resolve, stood motionless for a moment. Rainwater ran down his sturdy frame, tracing the scars of an old life etched into his skin. There was no collar around his neck, no human companion in sight. Yet his posture was not that of a stray wandering aimlessly. There was purpose in the way he held his head, a quiet determination radiating from his strong, square shoulders. Without hesitation, Diesel moved toward the hospital's entrance. The glass doors parted with a soft hiss as the motion sensor responded to his approach. No one stopped him. A few nurses, busy with their rounds or reviewing patient charts, barely noticed the rain-soaked dog passing through the lobby. Those who did glance up might have mistaken him for a therapy dog or simply assumed someone would deal with him shortly. But no one moved to intervene. It was as if, somehow, Diesel belonged there. On the third floor, within the sterile confines of the intensive care unit, a tiny life flickered precariously between this world and the next. Baby Harper lay motionless inside her incubator, her fragile chest rising and falling in erratic patterns. Wires and tubes encased her like a spider's web, connecting her small body to machines that monitored and sustained her life. Despite every intervention modern medicine could offer, her condition remained critical. Doctors had tried everything, and though they maintained a brave face for the family, the grim truth hung heavy in the air. Time was slipping away. Emily Carter stood watch by the infant's side. She had been there for hours, as she had every night since Harper's arrival. Emily was a seasoned nurse, known throughout Ridgeway for her steady hands and compassionate heart. But tonight, her mind drifted beyond the clinical charts and numbers. A shadow loomed over her, a shadow not cast by the flickering fluorescent lights, but by the weight of old memories refusing to stay buried. Years ago, Emily had known the same helplessness she now saw in Harper's parents. She had once stood beside her own child's hospital bed, watching monitors blink and beep while praying for just one more breath, one more heartbeat. Her son, Matthew, had been taken by a sudden illness that the doctors couldn't stop. That night had changed her forever. She became not just a nurse, but a woman, quietly determined to fight for every fragile life entrusted to her care. But no amount of experience could prevent the hollow ache in her chest as she looked at Harper. The baby's pulse was weak, her oxygen levels dangerously low. Emily could feel the room's oppressive weight, the quiet acknowledgement among staff that hope was fading. Yet, even amidst that heaviness, something about this night felt different. The air seemed to hum with a tension she couldn't explain, a sense that something or someone was coming. A low, rhythmic clicking broke through the silence. Emily's head lifted. She peered down the hallway, expecting to see a doctor or perhaps another nurse. Instead, she caught sight of Diesel padding calmly down the sterile corridor. Water dripped from his fur, forming small puddles beneath his deliberate steps. His deep brown eyes, alert yet serene, locked onto hers. For a split second, Emily's breath caught in her throat. That face, that steady gaze. It stirred something within her, a memory, a feeling she could not immediately place. Diesel paused at the entrance to Harper's room. The door, usually secured, stood slightly ajar, as if it had been waiting for him. Without a sound, he pushed it open wider with his nose and stepped inside. Emily did not stop him. Logic told her she should. No animals were allowed in the ICU, least of all an unverified dog. But her instincts, sharpened by years of nursing and the deeper wisdom of a grieving mother's heart, held her back. She watched as Diesel approached the incubator. His movements were careful, almost reverent. He sat beside the machine, lowering his body into a protective crouch. His eyes never left Harper. As if responding to his presence, the beeping of the heart monitor steadied. The fluctuations in Harper's oxygen levels eased ever so slightly. It could have been coincidence. Emily knew all too well how the mind sought patterns where none existed, but even as she told herself that, her heart whispered another possibility. The hospital had strict rules. Protocol was the foundation of care, but tonight, those rules felt distant and cold compared to the warmth that seemed to settle into the room with Diesel's arrival. Emily stepped forward, her gaze softening as she studied the pit bull. The rain outside intensified, battering the windows with renewed fury. Yet inside, a strange calm had taken hold. "Who are you?" she whispered, as much to herself as to the dog. "And why do you seem so familiar?" Diesel said nothing, of course, but his steady, patient eyes spoke volumes. He was not just a stray. He was not just a visitor. He was here with purpose. Emily knelt beside him, resting a hand lightly on his broad shoulder. The texture of his fur was coarse, damp from the rain, but beneath it she felt the solid, reassuring strength of a guardian, a protector. And then, like a key turning in a long-forgotten lock, recognition flared in her mind. A scar on Diesel's front leg, faded now but still distinct, a scar she had seen years before on a courageous pit bull who had saved her son during a tragic accident. That dog had vanished after the rescue. She had never known what became of him, until now. As the night deepened and the rain continued its mournful song, Emily understood. Diesel had come back. Not for her this time, but for Harper. For a promise made long ago. A silent promise that even time could not break. And in that moment, against every rule and every rational thought, Emily decided she would not stop him. Not tonight. Not ever. The door to the ICU, usually guarded by staff and strict policies, remained curiously unchallenged as Diesel entered. It was as if the building itself recognized his purpose. No one questioned him. No alarm sounded. The security cameras, those ever-watchful sentinels, captured his movements, but somehow no one reacted. Diesel moved with quiet certainty, each step measured and confident, as if he had been here before and knew exactly where he needed to go. The rhythmic clicking of his nails against the polished floor echoed softly in the otherwise silent corridor. Emily stood frozen, watching as the rain-soaked pit bull crossed the threshold into Harper's room. She knew she should intervene. The rules were clear. No unauthorized personnel or animals were allowed in the ICU. It was a sterile environment, tightly controlled to protect the fragile lives inside. And yet, Emily felt no urge to call security. Instead, an inexplicable calm washed over her. Diesel paused at the edge of the incubator, his deep brown eyes locked on Harper. The baby's tiny chest moved in shallow, uneven breaths, the monitors beside her bed casting a soft blue glow across the room. Emily's gaze shifted between the dog and the child. A strange, fleeting sensation stirred within her, a whisper of recognition. As Diesel lowered himself gently to the floor, he placed his head against the metal edge of the incubator. His eyes remained on Harper, steady and unwavering. The moment stretched, quiet and surreal. Then something remarkable happened. The erratic beeping of the heart monitor, which had become an ominous soundtrack to the ICU for days, began to settle. Harper's pulse, once unsteady and faint, found a rhythm. The oxygen saturation levels on the screen rose incrementally, almost imperceptibly at first. Emily blinked, unsure if she was imagining it. She leaned closer, watching the numbers stabilize. Her breath caught in her throat. Could it be a coincidence? Perhaps. Machines sometimes fluctuated for reasons beyond understanding. But as a nurse who had dedicated her life to neonatal care, Emily knew patterns. She recognized when improvement was real, and this was real. Still, a battle waged silently within her. Logic told her there was no scientific reason to credit the dog's presence for Harper's sudden progress. Yet another part of her, the part that had held onto hope through the darkest nights of her own life, whispered that this was no ordinary dog. Emily studied Diesel more carefully now. His grey coat, streaked darker by the rain, glistened in the dim light. His frame was sturdy but aged. There was a wisdom in his eyes, a depth she could not easily dismiss. And then the memory came, not in sharp detail, but like the soft edges of a dream just beyond reach. Years ago, a different hospital, a different child. Her son, Matthew, had been only 6 years old when the accident happened. A collapsed building during a community event. Panic, dust, screams. Emily had been off duty that day, there with her family, watching in horror as debris trapped her son beneath a heavy beam. She remembered clawing at the rubble with her bare hands, sobbing, helpless, and then came the dog, a pit bull canine, part of the search and rescue team deployed to the disaster site. The handler had shouted his name, Diesel. She would never forget the urgency in that voice. Diesel had located Matthew, burrowing through debris with a determination that defied the chaos around him. He had stayed with her son, refusing to leave even when ordered elsewhere. His steady presence had kept Matthew calm until the rescuers reached him. Afterward, Emily had tried to thank the dog and his handler. But Diesel had been reassigned. His handler told her that Diesel had been a seasoned service dog with years of active duty behind him. Emily never saw him again. Until now, her logical mind recoiled at the idea. Too many years had passed. Diesel would have aged out of service long ago. Dogs didn't simply appear after all that time, as if called by some unseen force. But the scar. Her eyes drifted to Diesel's front leg. In the faint light, she could just make out a patch of fur that didn't grow quite right, a silvery line beneath it. It was in the exact spot she remembered, an injury he'd sustained during the rescue, she'd been told. Her pulse quickened. No, it couldn't be. Yet, here he was. Diesel lifted his head slightly, as if sensing her scrutiny. His eyes met hers, calm and steady. There was no fear in his gaze, no confusion, only quiet understanding. Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to call his name aloud and see if he responded, but the words caught somewhere between her heart and her mouth. Instead, she moved closer, kneeling beside him. "You've come back," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft beeping of the monitors. But how? And why now? Diesel made no sound, but his eyes spoke volumes. Whatever the reasons, he was here for Harper now. His loyalty had transcended time and circumstance. He was not just protecting a child. He was fulfilling a promise once made in a time of fear and desperation. Emily placed her hand gently on Diesel's back. The texture of his fur was familiar, grounding her in the present, even as her mind reeled from the flood of past emotions. The world outside continued in its indifferent rhythm. Rain lashed against the windows. Nurses walked the halls beyond Harper's room, unaware of the quiet reunion taking place inside. Emily's instincts, honed by years of caregiving and a lifetime of love and loss, told her not to question this moment. The universe, for reasons she could not fathom, had brought Diesel back, and she would not stand in the way. She looked down at Harper, whose vitals had stabilized further in the dog's presence. The infant's small hand twitched as if reaching out, though she remained unconscious. A surge of protectiveness filled Emily's chest. She could not explain what was happening, and perhaps she never would. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Diesel was meant to be here, and she would do everything in her power to make sure he stayed. The days that followed were a delicate dance between hope and fear. Emily stayed close, watching Harper's vital signs with a vigilance born of both her professional training and a personal connection that ran far deeper. Diesel, ever silent and steadfast, became a quiet fixture in the ICU. At first, his presence was tolerated out of confusion and a lack of immediate protocol for such an unusual situation. But as the hours turned into days, a pattern began to emerge, one that defied explanation. Every time Diesel was near Harper, her vital signs stabilized. Her heart rate found a steady rhythm, her oxygen levels held firm, and the monitors displayed numbers that offered a fragile promise of survival. Nurses noticed. At first they murmured among themselves, hesitant to voice what they were all observing. Could it really be the dog? They were trained professionals, grounded in science and procedure, but the evidence was undeniable. Emily began to keep detailed notes, documenting every fluctuation. She charted Harper's stats with and without Diesel's presence. The correlation was impossible to ignore. Each time hospital staff attempted to move Diesel out of the ICU, Harper's condition would quickly deteriorate. Her heart rate would falter, oxygen levels would drop, and the monitors would issue their shrill warning tones. But when Diesel returned, the crisis eased. Time and time again, it wasn't coincidence, it couldn't be. Emily compiled the data meticulously, her hands steady even when her heart raced. She knew what she was risking by advocating for an unorthodox solution, her reputation, her job, perhaps even her career. But the choice was clear. Harper's life was worth every risk. Not everyone agreed. Dr. Ryan Mitchell, the head of the ICU, had watched the unfolding situation with a growing sense of alarm. A man of precision and discipline, Dr. Mitchell was known for his unwavering commitment to science and established medical protocols. He had spent decades building his reputation on facts, peer-reviewed studies, and the unshakable belief that medicine was a discipline of the mind, not the heart. When Emily first presented her findings to him, he listened in tight-lipped silence. His eyes, sharp and calculating, moved from the charts to the woman standing before him. "This is anecdotal at best," he finally said, voice clipped and controlled. "You're correlating unrelated data. The child's slight improvements can be attributed to the natural variability we see in critical care. You know that." "With all due respect, Doctor," Emily replied, keeping her tone calm despite the fire building in her chest. "The improvements are consistent and repeatable. I've accounted for every variable I can control. The only constant is Diesel." Dr. Mitchell's brow furrowed. "Emily, we cannot make medical decisions based on sentimentality or superstition. This is a hospital, not a storybook. The dog should not be in the ICU. You know the risks. Pathogens, allergens. If the board finds out, we could face serious consequences." Emily held her ground. "And if we remove him and Harper's condition worsens, what then? We'll have lost the only factor that seems to be helping her, even if we can't explain why." Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear of reprimand, but from the weight of knowing she was fighting for more than policy. She was fighting for Harper's life. And perhaps, on some deeper level, she was also fighting for a second chance at something she had lost long ago, the chance to save a child when science alone had fallen short. Dr. Mitchell sighed heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I will not allow unverified emotional theories to dictate patient care. This conversation is over." Emily knew she should back down. She should accept the hierarchy, the rules. But as she looked through the observation window into Harper's room, watching Diesel resting calmly by the incubator, she made her decision. She would not back down, even if it cost her everything. The next morning, Emily returned to the ICU early, bracing for a confrontation. But something unexpected happened. The nurses, once skeptical and cautious, had started to change their tune. One by one, they approached her during the shift change, voices hushed, but eyes determined. "We've been watching too," said Linda, the senior night nurse. "It's not just you." "We all see it. When Diesel's here, Harper improves. When he's gone, she crashes." "It's real, Emily." Another nurse chimed in. "We can't explain it, but that doesn't mean it's not happening." They had even started calling Diesel Guardian. It began as a quiet nickname, a whispered acknowledgement among the staff, but soon it became how everyone referred to him. Guardian. Not just a title, but a recognition of his role in Harper's struggle to survive. Word spread quickly, despite efforts to keep the situation contained. Some doctors remained wary, others intrigued. A few administrators caught wind of the situation and called for a formal review, but Emily managed to buy time by emphasizing the need for continued observation. Behind closed doors, she faced pressure and threats of disciplinary action. But in the quiet moments, when she watched Harper's steady breathing and felt Diesel's calm, watchful presence, Emily knew she was doing the right thing. The battle lines were drawn. Science versus instinct. Data versus the unexplainable. Emily stood in the middle of it all, unshaken. And in Harper's quiet, fragile breaths, she found the strength to continue the fight. The ICU had always been a place of cold logic and sterile precision. Every decision made inside its walls followed strict protocols, built upon years of scientific research and medical ethics. Yet now, beneath the hum of machines and the steady rhythm of monitors, the air had grown thick with an entirely different force. Uncertainty. The whispers started quietly. A few murmured concerns among the junior staff. Then came the formal meetings. Hospital administration had begun to notice the growing attention surrounding Diesel's presence. Some viewed it as a heartwarming anomaly, others as a dangerous breach of protocol. The final blow came when an infection control specialist raised a red flag. Diesel, despite his calm demeanor and apparent benefit to Harper, could potentially carry a rare zoonotic infection. It was an unlikely scenario, but even a small risk in an ICU could not be ignored. By the following morning, the hospital board had issued a directive. Diesel was to be removed from Harper's room immediately and taken for full veterinary examination and quarantine testing. The decision was presented without emotion, just a matter of policy, a necessary precaution. But for Emily, it felt like a sentence. She stood alone in the conference room where the order was delivered, the fluorescent lights above casting a harsh glow. The administrators spoke in clipped tones, citing liability concerns and the welfare of other patients. Dr. Ryan Mitchell sat across the table, arms crossed tightly against his chest. His expression was unreadable. Perhaps he expected Emily to comply. Perhaps he hoped she would finally relent to reason. But reason had never saved her child. Emily returned to the ICU, her heart pounding. Diesel lay quietly beside Harper's incubator, his steady eyes watching both the child and the world beyond the glass. His presence radiated calm, as if he sensed the storm brewing outside but refused to be shaken by it. Harper's tiny form remained stable, her vitals more consistent than they had been in weeks. Emily knew, deep in her bones, that removing Diesel now could unravel all the fragile progress they had fought for. She knelt beside Diesel, resting a trembling hand on his back. "They want to take you away," she whispered, voice breaking. They think you might be dangerous, but I know better. Her mind raced back to the darkest night of her life. Matthew, her son, the collapse, the dust. The desperate hands clawing at rubble, and Diesel, young and powerful then, digging relentlessly until he found her boy. Diesel had stayed with Matthew, refusing to leave even when his handler called him away. He had defied orders once before, choosing loyalty and instinct over human logic. Now Emily faced a similar choice. If she allowed Diesel to be taken for testing, Harper would lose not only a silent guardian, but the mysterious, undeniable source of her stability. If Diesel stayed, Emily would violate hospital policy, risk disciplinary action, possible termination, and even legal repercussions. She would jeopardize the very career she had built on following rules and protecting lives. But following the rules had not saved Matthew. Tears filled Emily's eyes, blurring the monitor's glow into soft halos. She thought of all the years spent carrying the guilt of her son's death, the regret of not fighting harder, of trusting processes over instincts. No one had blamed her, but she had blamed herself. "I won't make the same mistake again," she said softly. The nurses gathered quietly at the doorway. They had heard the rumors. Some nodded in silent support. Linda, the senior night nurse, placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "We're with you," she said. "If you choose to keep him here, we'll back you." Emily looked up at Dr. Mitchell, who had followed her from the meeting. His face was drawn, a battle of emotions playing behind his eyes. "Emily," he began, his tone softer than before, "I understand why you care. We all do. But this isn't just about one patient anymore. The board isn't here watching this child struggle every day," Emily interrupted, standing to face him fully. "You know as well as I do that Harper's improvements aren't coincidental. I can't explain it. You can't either. But Diesel is helping her. And I will not be the one who takes that away." Mitchell sighed, rubbing his temple. "You're risking your job, possibly your license." "I know," Emily said. Her voice didn't waver. "I've spent years following rules, but rules didn't save Matthew. And they won't save Harper. Not without Diesel." The room fell into a heavy silence. Diesel looked between them, his calm gaze unwavering. Harper's monitor continued its steady, reassuring beeps. Mitchell exhaled slowly. "I can't protect you from the consequences." "I'm not asking you to," Emily replied. With that, the decision was made. Emily signed the refusal order, officially taking full responsibility for keeping Diesel in the ICU. It was a choice born not just of defiance, but of something deeper, a belief that sometimes the heart knew what science could not. As the hospital prepared for the potential fallout, Emily returned to Harper's side. Diesel curled closer to the incubator, his breathing slow and even. In that moment, despite the uncertainty ahead, Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in years, she had chosen to trust not just the data, but the quiet, persistent voice within her that whispered of faith, instinct, and the kind of love that defied explanation. Harper's future remained fragile. But so long as Diesel stayed by her side, Emily dared to hope. The final night arrived like the slow descent of a curtain. Shadows gathered in the corners of the ICU, stretching long and thin beneath the cold glow of overhead lights. The rain had returned, tapping against the windows in a steady, mournful rhythm. Emily sat at Harper's bedside, exhaustion pressing on her shoulders, but unable to dull the sharp edge of anxiety cutting through her chest. Diesel lay curled beside Harper's incubator, his head resting on his paws. His breathing was slow and steady, a quiet anchor in the storm of uncertainty swirling around them. The other nurses moved through the ICU with hushed footsteps, casting glances at the pit bull who had, against all odds, become the child's silent protector. Emily had stayed vigilant through the night, knowing that tomorrow might bring consequences she could not control. The hospital board had agreed to delay Diesel's removal by 1 day, a small reprieve granted only because of Harper's recent improvements. But that fragile thread of hope felt as thin as the IV lines feeding into the tiny infant's veins. As midnight approached, the monitors kept their steady rhythm. Emily allowed herself a moment of cautious relief. Perhaps Harper would hold on long enough for a new solution to emerge. Perhaps Diesel's presence would continue to work the quiet magic no one could fully explain. But miracles, it seemed, had their own timing. Without warning, the heart monitor let out a sharp, continuous tone. The line on the screen flattened into a harsh, unbroken stripe. Harper's tiny chest ceased its fragile rise and fall. The silence that followed felt like a punch to the gut. "Code Blue!" Emily's voice broke through the stillness as she slammed the emergency button. Alarms blared. Nurses and doctors flooded into the room. Dr. Ryan Mitchell arrived, snapping on gloves with practiced speed, his face a mask of clinical focus. He and the team worked in swift, coordinated motions, compressions, oxygen, medication. The room filled with the sounds of life-saving efforts. Commands barked, equipment clicking and hissing, the desperate rhythm of hands pressing against Harper's frail chest. Emily stood back, her fists clenched at her sides. She had seen this before, too many times, the cycle of hope and desperation. The sharp, bitter edge of defeat waiting just beyond the reach of their best efforts. Minutes passed, too many. Harper did not respond. Dr. Mitchell stepped back, his brow furrowed. No pulse, no spontaneous respiration. Emily's heart sank. Around her, the room seemed to blur, the faces of her colleagues swimming behind a sheen of tears. But Diesel remained calm. Without a sound, the pit bull rose to his feet. His body moved with a grace that defied his age. Slowly, deliberately, he placed his front paws at the edge of the incubator. His nose brushed against Harper's tiny hand, the touch as gentle as a feather landing on glass. A hush fell over the room. The heart monitor, silent for what felt like an eternity, flickered. Then, against every expectation, a faint beep sounded. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Another beep followed, and another. The line on the monitor, once flat, began to pulse with a weak but steady rhythm. Harper's chest lifted in a shallow breath. The medical team froze, even Dr. Mitchell, the man who placed unwavering trust in data and science, could only stare, his mouth slightly open in stunned disbelief. This isn't possible, he whispered, but it was happening. Emily rushed forward, tears spilling freely down her face. She grasped Harper's small hand and felt warmth where there had been none before. Her gaze shifted to Diesel, who remained poised, watchful, his deep brown eyes reflecting the soft glow of the monitors. It was then that Emily noticed the scar. Faint, hidden beneath the pit bull's gray fur, the small, silvery line marked Diesel's front leg. A scar she remembered vividly, a scar left by shattered glass during the rescue of her son so many years ago. Her breath hitched. The weight of the truth settled over her with breathtaking clarity. Diesel wasn't just any dog. He wasn't just a stray who had wandered in on a rainy night. He was the same loyal soul who had once saved her child from the brink of death. He had disappeared after that fateful day, his service ended, his fate unknown. Until now, he had returned, not by chance, not by coincidence, by choice, by promise. As the monitors steadied and Harper's fragile body clung to life once more, Emily felt a rush of gratitude so profound it left her trembling. Diesel had defied the boundaries of time, of understanding, even of mortality itself. Doc. Mitchell lowered his hands, shaking his head slowly. For once, the man who demanded explanations found himself speechless. Some things, he seemed to realize, could not be measured in data points or explained by science. Some things simply were. Emily knelt beside Diesel, her fingers brushing through his damp fur. "Thank you," she whispered, "for keeping your promise." And Diesel, faithful and silent, simply watched over Harper, just as he had always done. Morning arrived quietly, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The first rays of sunlight broke through the storm clouds, casting soft golden beams across the Ridgeway Hospital ICU. The rain had stopped sometime in the early hours, leaving the city washed clean and glistening. The heavy, suffocating darkness of the previous night had given way to a fragile peace. Emily sat by Harper's bedside, unable to sleep. Her eyes stung from tears shed and withheld, but she could not look away from the tiny miracle before her. Harper stirred. It was subtle at first, a twitch of her fingers, the barest movement of her head. Emily leaned in, scarcely daring to hope. The monitors confirmed what her heart was already telling her. The baby's vitals were steady and strong. Then slowly, Harper's eyelids fluttered open. Deep, clear eyes met Emily's. A breath hitched in Emily's throat. She reached out, and Harper's delicate hand grasped her finger with surprising strength. The simple gesture shattered the weight of weeks filled with fear, doubt, and heartache. "You held on," Emily whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "You came back to us." Around them, the nurses paused in their tasks. Even the most seasoned among them found tears pooling in their eyes. A nurse quietly stepped out to inform Dr. Mitchell, Diesel, ever the silent guardian, stood beside the incubator. He watched Harper calmly, his tail wagging just once in a slow, measured sweep. There was no excitement in his demeanor, only a quiet recognition that his work was done. Emily turned to Diesel. "We did it," she murmured. "You did it." As if understanding, Diesel stepped forward and pressed his head gently against Emily's arm. His eyes, those soulful, knowing eyes, locked with hers. There was warmth in them, but also something deeper, a sense of farewell. Emily's breath caught. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Diesel didn't need to answer. She could feel it in the heaviness of the moment, the way the morning light seemed to frame him in gold, as though the world itself was ready to release him from his duties. The door opened, and Dr. Mitchell entered, stopping in his tracks as he saw Harper awake and gripping Emily's finger. Relief washed over his stern features, softening them into something more human, more vulnerable than Emily had ever seen. "She's stable," he said quietly, almost in disbelief. "Truly stable." Emily nodded, unable to find words. "Doctor?" Mitchell looked at Diesel, then back at Emily. "The board wants to retain the dog for study. They think there might be something unique about his biology, something worth examining." Emily shook her head gently. "He's given enough. His purpose here is fulfilled. Holding him now would only dishonor what he's done, Doctor." Mitchell studied her for a long moment. For the first time, his unwavering dedication to data seemed to waver. Behind his professional reserve, something had shifted. He nodded. "I won't stop him." Diesel stepped back from Harper's crib. His paws made soft sounds against the tile floor as he walked toward the door. Emily followed, heart aching with every step. The other nurses moved aside silently, forming a quiet path for him. At the entrance to the ICU, Diesel paused. He looked back once more at Emily. In his gaze, she saw everything words could not express: gratitude, closure, understanding, and forgiveness. Because Diesel had not only saved Harper, he had also saved Emily. For years, she had carried the guilt of losing Matthew. She had questioned every decision, replayed every moment, always wondering if she could have done more. That guilt had colored her life, her choices, even her sense of worth as a nurse and a person. But Diesel had returned, not to remind her of what had been lost, but to show her what could still be saved. In protecting Harper, he had given Emily a chance to believe again, to forgive herself, to release the chains of the past. The pit bull turned and walked through the automatic doors, disappearing into the brightening city streets beyond. Emily watched him go, tears streaking her cheeks, but this time they were not only tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of renewal. Behind her, Dr. Mitchell cleared his throat. "Emily," she turned. "I've been thinking," he said, "about all of this. About what Diesel did and what it means." She waited. "I want you to lead a new initiative," he continued. "A program, Guardian Hearts. Therapy dogs in the ICU, officially approved, will give others a chance at the kind of healing we've seen here." Emily's breath caught again, this time with hope. "You mean it?" He nodded. "It's time we embrace the things we can't always explain." A small smile touched Emily's lips. She looked once more toward the empty doorway where Diesel had stood. "Thank you," she whispered. And somewhere, beyond the walls of the hospital, Emily liked to believe Diesel had heard her. His mission complete. His promise kept. The weeks that followed unfolded like the slow blossoming of spring after a long, relentless winter. Harper's recovery, once thought impossible, became a quiet triumph witnessed by those who had stood vigil at her bedside. Day by day, her strength returned. Her breathing grew stronger, her tiny limbs no longer frail but full of the promise of life not yet lived. The monitors that had once charted a perilous course now displayed steady, healthy rhythms. At first, the doctors had remained cautious, unable to explain the dramatic turn of events. Dr. Ryan Mitchell reviewed Harper's files obsessively, comparing data, consulting specialists, and running tests. But the conclusion was always the same. Her recovery defied medical explanation. By the third week, Harper was feeding on her own. Her eyes followed movement with curiosity, and her fingers grasped whatever was placed within reach. She responded to voices, smiled, and let out soft, contented coos. The sterile confines of the ICU were soon exchanged for a private recovery room bathed in gentle morning light. On a bright Friday morning, Harper was officially discharged. Her parents, who had once braced themselves for heartbreak, now wept tears of joy. Emily stood nearby, holding Harper for one last moment before placing her into her mother's arms. The weight of the child was no longer heavy with fear, but light with hope. As the family left the hospital, Emily's eyes turned instinctively toward the lobby entrance. She half expected to see Diesel waiting, as he always had during those uncertain nights, but the doors remained closed, the rain-soaked floors from earlier weeks now dry and polished. Diesel was gone, but his presence lingered, not in a physical sense, but in the hearts of everyone he had touched. Emily's professional suspension had been lifted days earlier. Not only had the hospital reinstated her, but they had also awarded her a commendation for her dedication and courage under extraordinary circumstances. Yet for Emily, the real reward was the knowledge that Harper had survived, and that through Diesel's actions, something greater had been set into motion. Dr. Mitchell, once the staunch defender of data and reason, had become her unlikely ally. After Harper's recovery, he called a meeting with the hospital board. "We are scientists," he had begun, "but science does not exclude the unknown. We've witnessed something extraordinary, not as a replacement for medicine, but as a partner to it." With his support, Emily proposed a new program, Guardian Hearts. Its mission was simple but revolutionary: to integrate certified therapy dogs into pediatric and intensive care units nationwide. The program aimed to offer comfort, companionship, and perhaps the inexplicable healing that Diesel had once provided. Approval came quickly. News of Harper's story had spread quietly through the medical community, sparking interest and support from other hospitals and health organizations. Emily found herself not just a nurse, but a founder, a pioneer carrying forward a legacy born of a silent guardian's love. Months passed, and the Guardian Hearts program grew. Ridgeway Hospital became the pilot site. Each morning, carefully trained dogs walked beside their handlers into the pediatric wing. The reactions were always the same. Children smiled, parents wept, and even the most hardened doctors softened. The hospital, once defined by the sharp edges of clinical practice, now pulsed with warmth and hope. Emily watched each day as the dogs moved through the corridors, their paws clicking softly against the tiles, their eyes bright with purpose. And every time she saw them, she thought of Diesel. She thought of the night he had returned, not by chance, but by promise. The night he had taught her that while medicine could measure heartbeats and oxygen levels, it could not quantify love, loyalty, or the quiet miracles forged in the bonds between species. One autumn afternoon, Emily paused in the hospital's front garden where a small plaque had been installed beneath a flowering dogwood tree in honor of Diesel, the silent guardian. Sometimes healing comes on 4 paws. She traced her fingers over the engraved words, a soft smile curving her lips. Some of the younger nurses often asked what had happened to Diesel after Harper's recovery. Emily always answered the same way. He moved on to help others, she would say. And she believed it. In a city filled with endless streets and alleyways, Diesel continued his journey. Not seeking recognition, not longing for reward. Wherever there was fear, loss, or the fragile hope of survival, he would appear, not as a miracle, but as a steadfast companion to those in need. No headlines chronicled his path. No cameras followed him. His purpose was quiet, his impact immeasurable, a silent guardian forever. And so, as Diesel disappeared into the city's endless streets, his purpose fulfilled, we are reminded that not all heroes wear capes. Some walk quietly on 4 paws, leaving behind not fame or fortune, but a legacy of hope and healing. Harper's life was saved not only by medicine, but by love, loyalty, and the silent promise between a child and her guardian. At Veilmarks, we believe every story holds a mirror to our humanity. Diesel's journey teaches us that even in a world ruled by logic and science, there is room for the unexplained, for faith, for instinct, and for the silent protectors who remind us that miracles do not always announce themselves. As the old saying goes, sometimes the smallest things take up the most room in your heart. Diesel was not small in size, but his silent actions filled countless hearts with courage and belief. If this story touched you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. I read each one and they inspire me more than you know. Please consider subscribing to Veilmarks. Reaching 1,000 subscribers would not just be a milestone, it would be a heartfelt encouragement, allowing me to craft even richer, more meaningful videos in the future. Stay kind, stay hopeful. And remember, silent guardians are everywhere watching over us all.